Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining Modern Sales Pros today for our discussion about building your onboarding program from the ground up. Happy 2021, everybody. But before we jump into today's content, we want to get a chance to meet our panelists. And they're both first-time panelists with MSP, which is always exciting. But Adriana and Matt, we have a little bit of a tradition here. One of the things that we always want to learn about our panelists is a little bit more about you. So we ask our panelists, especially the first time, any new skills that you've picked up or hobbies that you've refined since the start of the pandemic? And Adriana, let's start with you.
So thank you for having me here, guys. It's a pleasure to be on with this team. I was really thinking about this one, and I have to say, surviving being a parent during quarantine was, basically my skill. It was a challenging year for all parents, and if we have parents in the audience, I think that let's raise a glass for all of you.
I love it. I love it. It's pretty tricky, right? You've got homeschooling, plus you've got, and it's convenient too that you're going to educate us about enablement, which is something I'm sure that you've had a chance to help out with at home as well.
A little bit.
just a little bit. And Matt Cameron, longtime MSP member, I think first time panelist in quite some time. Anything new that you've picked up since the start of the pandemic? Any new hobbies or skills, tips or tricks?
Yeah, I'll give you two quick ones. One is I've made a recommitment to daily meditation, which I have to tell you in the last 12 months has been very helpful to create some space between what's going on around you and being in the moment. And I do that just using apps. So if you're not doing it and you've always been thinking about it, go grab an app and that's an easy way to onboard. But the big thing for me, Richard, is in February last year, my wife and I decided to go plant-based diet. So the new skill I've learned is how to make mung beans look and taste like scrambled eggs. And you don't believe me, but Richard, when I see you next, I'm going to make you scrambled eggs and avocado that you will just blow your mind.
That is the most San Francisco thing I've ever heard. And I'm so excited to try mung beans and avocado. That sounds amazing. Not a beer, not a cocktail. Give me the mung beans that are like scrambled eggs. That's awesome.
I'm crashing that party.
I think we could do a meditation together to give Adriana some space from her children and then have some mung beans and then maybe mimosas afterwards. I think that could be a fun time. I love it, gang. I love it. Well, folks, some folks are still settling in here, but we're going to go ahead and get started. We've got a lot to get through today, and I'm really excited to have these two amazing panelists join us. Today, we're going to be talking about building your onboarding program from the ground up. This is sponsored by the amazing team at Level Jump. And for those of you who don't know or maybe aren't familiar, today's event is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders in sales management, sales and revenue enablement, revenue operations, and the related supporting disciplines. We have about 22,000 members and growing, and we seek to create an environment for our community members where they can answer the most difficult questions they'd struggle to answer on their own, whether through bringing panelists like Matt and Adriana together on an amazing topic, through discussions in our online forum, or through, once we all get the jab, through our in-person events, which were wildly popular. We have over 6,000 organizations in the community. So when you ask a question, you get perspective from across the board, not just growth SaaS organizations, not just big enterprises, but everything and everyone in between. Everything that we do for our community members is free. And for those of you on today who aren't members, you will be invited to join afterwards. But as I said at the beginning, our programming today wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship from the team at Level Jump. And I'm going to hand it off to Adriana to say just a few words about Level Jump. Adriana?
Amazing. Thank you so much. So, here at Level Jump, we help all of those people out there that are enabling revenue teams and to really understand what is the attribution of their enablement programs. We have helped customers like Shopify and others to actually help them not only build their programs natively in Salesforce, but also to understand what are the behaviors that their sales teams are doing in order to be top performers, and what are those things that they need to do to bring the other sides of the team up to where the top performers are. Very simple in a nutshell, but I'm very happy to be here, part of the team, was a former customer, and now I am very honored to be their director of enablement.
This is awesome. And Adriana, this is a smooth transition, right? Today, we're going to be talking about building onboarding programs from the ground up, and we've got two of the best in the business at this. Adriana, you started, but please share a little bit more about yourself with our audience here today.
Of course. So yes, I started running onboarding for open text 5 years ago, and that was my initiation at enablement. I have 15 years of sales experience, mostly in basically SaaS and software industry. I do have some stints in beer and other industries that are very exciting. But basically, I've built my enablement career out of not only big corporations like OpenText, but I have also built 3 enablement functions in startups, this being my third, and where onboarding, as always, is one of the hottest topics of enabling any kind of new team. I have been also able to accelerate metrics in, these high performance teams, bring and help the growth of ClearBank, where, when I joined the sales team, we were 35. By the time I exited, we were over 100. And I was able to help not only onboard and train and certify that team as well. I'm based out of Toronto, Canada, and I am originally from Caracas, Venezuela. So yeah, super happy to be here and happy to share my experience.
And I'm Matt Cameron, and I'm also not from North America. This accent comes to you all the way from New Zealand, which is currently COVID-3, go Team New Zealand. And I guess my claim to fame was joining Salesforce.com back in 2005. So I've been in SaaS for around 15 years, but I actually began my technology sales career 26 years ago out of university. That's a little while now. Things have changed. And the reason I'm excited to participate in this forum today is because I've worked for very large companies, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and Salesforce as they scaled, and seen what that looks like, and some good, some bad. But I've also worked 10 years in Silicon Valley with Series A, Series B companies. Some of you may remember Yammer as an example, and know what it's like to be an army of one in enablement, and also to have an army of none. So for those of you on the call who are heads of sales and are trying to figure out how to do it yourself, I'll definitely have some perspective to share as well.
This is great. And for both of our panelists' perspective at all different sizes, shapes, and scales of organization. And this content is really timely. I think there's a lot of folks who've got maybe a class that's just getting started now, or maybe they've got a sales kickoff early next month that they're just getting started with. So great time for everybody, all of our attendees. We've got these panelists for about an hour here. So questions that you have, please do use the Q&A panel. We'll do our best to get to as many of those as possible. And also we'll be sharing the recording and key takeaways with everybody here in attendance afterwards. So we'll get that out to everyone. But with that, let's jump into it and let's talk a little bit more about actually building onboarding. And I know this is a little bit of a how long is a piece of string type of problem. But Matt, you've mentioned you've seen it at a lot of different organizations. At a high growth or a fast growing organization, who's typically involved in building onboarding, and who do you think about that actually owns onboarding?
Well, I think earlier, let's talk about it in 2 stages. If you're an army of none, meaning you don't have a dedicated sales enablement function, you have to remember it's very much a team effort. And one of the mistakes I consistently see is that functional leaders are left to their own devices to bring on and enable their own people and build the ramp program. And I think that's a mistake. I think it should be a collaborative effort across the functional heads, for sure, and it should be sponsored by some nominated exec. Now, in a small organization, it might be HR, you might have a fancy title like COO or something like that, but they help build the foundation of onboarding across all orgs, talking about things like the why, right? What we do, who we do it for, shared vision, mission, and values. And that should be consistent across all. And then the functional, very, very early on, functional leaders will need to design role-specific programs to make sure people know what the job to be done is. Funnily enough, I think most of the time the most basic needs are missed. For example, silly things like tech and system access, making sure everyone has access to the right systems in very, very early stage companies. And then tactical things like making sure during onboarding people have access to things like headsets and work from home type technology and whatnot. If, however, you do have a full-time enablement person, which is a luxury you shouldn't waste, then that typically, as I would describe it, I'd love Adriana's perspective on this. I think of them like a program manager, program director. And the mistake I see CEOs making is thinking I've hired an enablement person. Now he or she is going to go and do everything. And that's right. That's not how it is. Have you seen that, Adriana?
So you know what? I've seen it somewhere. Sounds familiar.
Right.
Yeah.
And so early on, that's how I think about it. It's a team effort. You need an executive sponsor, and this common base of the why is really, really important to get right. And as you're growing and you think about your first enablement hire, Adriana and I have had different experiences on this, and I would say that ideally, if you can bring in a professional, that's great. However, if you're in a very early stage company selling a very technical product, I like, and I've seen great success with promoting somebody from within who doesn't know how to build an enablement program. They don't know. They'll need to get a mentor or a coach who's external that can help you figure out what does a good onboarding and ramp program look like. But they know the product, the market, the competition, whatever else, so they can be immediately effective in creating content and understanding the issues. Whereas if you're selling a highly technical product and you bring in an enablement professional, A, you may not be able to afford them at that level yet, and B, it's going to take them a while to get up to speed. So this is not a universal truth, but just something I'd like you to consider if you're in that context.
That's a very good point, Matt. And I think that, we've been talking about this, and yeah, I've had, having built 3 enablement functions, I had the ability to work with different types of leaders and different type of, executive sponsors. And I do agree that the most important part is that at least the person who is leading the sales team, call it CRO, VP of sales, is like an enablement, like loving person. This person is a fan of enablement. They understand the value and they know why they're bringing enablement in. That is super important, because first mistake is there's a buzz about sales enablement. Let's bring somebody, and I have no clue what that person is going to do. That happened to me once, and it was very frustrating, not only for me, but for the people on the team. And because they were paying me a salary and people did not understand what I was doing. And that's very frustrating at the end. I do have to say that when I have joined companies that are already at that point where they say, you know what, we need to bring sales enablement, I've either seen that there's a combination of HR with the sales leader owning and co-owning kind of that onboarding, because there is the company onboarding kind of, component. But then there is, how are they going to do their job? And the problem is that that's very unstructured. And even though sometimes sales operations naturally will be owning that role at the beginning, they will know how to teach them how to, let's go and use, Salesforce or HubSpot or the tool that you're using. And let me show you how to, operationally look at your pipeline and look at your tools. But there's that component of the skills that's going to be missing. And what people tend to do is either you have one of the seasoned reps, either coach this person, or you have the sales leader do it. In regards, Matt, to what you were talking, and we definitely have different points of view around hiring somebody with experience or hiring within. I would say that there could be like a middle point. I think that the best experience comes when you can hire somebody that comes with some enablement experience, but you get them to do the role at least for their own onboarding. So because nobody talks about how to onboard enablement, and that's super important. When you're not only thinking about building onboarding for your team, think about, you're going to bring this person that's going to run your onboarding and your always boarding and certifications and skills training, but how do you onboard them? And that is a thought that has to be the first thing in your mind. And the best way I have done it, do the role or be very close to the role that you're going to enable for the first 30 days. So you can understand how, not only the product, but you can understand what they're doing. That has been, the way of me seeing this type of onboarding.
I think that those are great points. And one question that I'm sure folks in the audience have, but Adriana, let's start with you, because you've seen it at a few different organizations before. Is there a point in time where it's like a no-brainer to bring on onboarding? Is there a rule of thumb or a rubric that folks can use, be like, oh, at 50 sales reps or whatever it might be?
I would say, I would not say that there's a particular number, but I say that if after you have product market fit, that it's selling, you already have a team. Let's say that you have a combination of BDRs and AEs, and you're ready to say, I need more power. I need, 5 to 10 BDRs, and I'm going to need to hire 5 more AEs because we need to grow. That is the moment where you have to think, not only are we going to grow with these people, but do I have the tools to make these people efficient as soon as they come in? And that is when you say, okay, if the plan for this year is this growth, then it makes sense to bring enablement, because not only you're onboarding these people, is what happens with all these cohorts that are going to be in, and that you're going to have to continue to enable.
Well, it seems like it's again, we've talked about enablement a bunch of different ways with MSP, but it's a very high leverage position. And it sounds like what you're saying is, hey, if you know you're going to grow and you've got something that, you know, more than a founder can sell, maybe it's the right time to think about enablement and onboarding as a thing, not just like a, well, Matt, here's your Salesforce login. Godspeed.
Exactly.
Well, and I want to kind of get to the second point too. And Adriana, let's start with you on this. How is it different at a bigger organization, right? You mentioned you're at like a beer company before. How does the ownership of onboarding change or evolve as a company gets bigger and bigger and bigger?
So it just changes because you come from being, you know, as Matt said, you know, you're a group of one and you're that person managing everything in enablement, to being a group of maybe many. When I was working in enterprise, we were a group of, at one point we came to be 19, where we had specialized groups. There was a group that was handling only product enablement, and that was 6 people. We had 4 people that were handling only facilitation, right? And they were doing only that. We had the people that were leading, and then it was a group of 3 of us who were doing onboarding. And the only thing we did was focus on onboarding. Reason being, we had, I would say, 7 to 8 classes a year for a boot camp that we did in person here in Waterloo in Canada. And we were bringing 40 to 50 people from all over the world.
My goodness.
And yeah, it was pretty intense, because you can imagine bringing people for 1 week, especially, you know, coming here into, you have to do something that it's worth the time, the money, and the effort when people are traveling from Japan, Singapore, you know, Spain, from Brazil. So it was also like, what has to happen before they come to the boot camp? What happens after? And in what moment in time do you hand it off to the manager? Because you can't follow this class throughout their entire ramp period. What do you hand off to the manager, and who takes it from there, right? So I would say in the enterprise, there is the group that is enablement, but frontline managers and all those head of sales from different divisions or different products or different, you know, silos of the company, they also have to have, you know, that hand in hand with you to take this person after you left them and you say, you know, here's your kid. They already graduated. They did the boot camp. They were able to do this. My journey stops here. Now there's another person from my team that's going to help you push them forward, but we need you to co-own this with us.
I think that's a phenomenal set of points there. Matt, you know, like you said, you've been at some teeny tiny organizations like Salesforce and some high growth ones like that little company called Yammer. How do you think about, or how should folks think about onboarding in sort of enterprise or bigger, you know, organizations?
I think really Adriana nailed it. It's specialization, and I think she made the point well. The only thing I might add to that, which we'll probably talk about later, is in large organizations we have the luxury of being a little bit more data driven because we have more data points. But I won't jump into that too early. But I think that's a big differentiator. In small companies, we kind of do the best we can, and it's a little bit more qualitative.
I think this is great. And there's a great point too. Nancy Pratt made a point in the Q&A panel. Nancy, we love it, right? They've developed at Nancy's organization an onboarding guide for their new enablement folks. So it's a really effective way, to Adriana's point earlier, to get the new enablement folks ramped very, very quickly. It's great.
Nancy, we need that, man. That's amazing. You know how many enablers I hear that's their biggest struggle? I think that's impressive.
It's like who watches the watchmen, who enables the enablers. It's important. And I think we've all got horror stories about that too. Hey, welcome aboard. Figure it out. This is, I think, the most common question that we got in registration. And I think it's one that a lot of folks look to try to understand, like, how long should onboarding last? And I know it depends on a lot of different things, but Matt, you know, I know you've seen this before at a lot of different flavors. Let's get started with you here. How long does it last, and what's the role of kind of who you're hiring play into that onboarding length?
Yeah, so the way I think about it is the purpose of onboarding is to get somebody to productivity. If we can agree on that, the first principle being we're ramping them. And in my view, ramping means to the point where they can consistently deliver the objectives we put in front of them. So in sales, it's different to CS, but let's stick with sales. It means hitting your quota consistently. If we said our onboarding program is 60 days, I think that's the wrong way to start. Our onboarding is until they're able to consistently do their job the way we expect them. We hope it's 60 days, or we hope it's 30 days, or we hope it's 2 weeks, but we'll learn what it is. And I don't think anybody falls off the onboarding program until they're successfully through that. Now, that's not to say that someone in Adriana's role, for example, is responsible for that human and getting them to quota all the way through. Well, what I will say is the data behind how long it takes them to get ramped should inform what onboarding looks like. And a specific example I'll give you is the difference between a high velocity transactional sale, where you might do a 2-week style boot camp and that they're actually hitting quota within 3 months, versus an enterprise sales where someone doesn't complete their first sale for 9 months. So then the question is, what's onboarding, what's enablement? Well, yeah, if I teach someone how to do a contract negotiation and configure price quote in week 1, and they don't sell anything for 9 months, that's going to go straight out of their head. So you know what I mean? It's semantics, but the first principle for me is as I described.
I love that point. So you're saying CPQ tools get a bad rap because we're onboarding it just too soon to use them. That's what it is. Now, I think
point, Richard. Yes, exactly.
No, I think that's a great point, and also the notion of sort of the just-in-time relevancy of it, right? Good time to learn how to do discovery calls is shortly before you get on the phone. Good time to learn about pricing and negotiation is before you're getting into that phase of a deal. I love it. Adriana, how else should folks think about this in terms of how long onboarding, onboarding should last?
Yeah, I am so in agreement with Matt on this, and we shared this in our conversation of, if you do the typical learn by drinking from the fire hose in the first month, you're not only going to forget everything as a seller, you're just going to be overwhelmed, and it's going to be very frustrating for you. Onboarding is an enablement program, and as a program, it has to be a finite, motion. So there has to be a way to say it finalizes here. In many cases, people, that we work with, it's like, okay, it finalizes when you get time to first meeting, time to first deal, time to first opportunity created. So I think it's super important to define what is the outcome that you want from your onboarding from that specific role. After that, you say, okay, this is onboarding. What do we do ramp, right? How do we bring these people to hit their quota? To give you an example, in the last company I was in, we had a very, very fast onboarding because, to Matt's point, it was a transactional sale, but we had a ramp quota for the salespeople that was there was to be hit in their 90 days, but they had a quota in the 30 and the 60 and the 90, and the 30 was very aggressive because we would say, if you can do this job and you can hit this quota in the first 30 days, we're confident that your ramp time and the things that we have to polish for you are going to be minimal, that you're going to be able to hit the rest of the quota. And that was a process of learning, right? When I joined that company, we had to hit something like a crazy number, and we learned that that number was too much. And then we also learned what are the things that they need, not only month by month, but week by week. Because to give you an example, if right now that I just onboarded people at our company, if I told them, if I give you objection handling the first week, you don't even know what an objection sounds like in selling this product. So you're going to be like, how do I use this? And you're going to come and ask me for objection handling training anyway. So I tell people the training for the sake of doing training makes no sense. Let's learn, do, correct. Let's learn, do, correct. And let's put a finalized kind of like, here's the capstone. Here's when onboarding ends. Here's when ramp begins.
And I think one of the points too that Adriana makes there that's important, and I want to echo, is having some data around what success looks like. And to Matt's point, maybe that's something that you have is when you're a little bit bigger, but really understanding that you should be able to do this by this point in time, whether it's, you're on the phones making cold calls, you've got early stage conversations. In a transactional business, maybe you've got your first couple deals closed, and then really working backwards from that to like, what do they need and when do they need it to make it happen? And there's some great discussion going on and some great questions coming in. I'm going to paraphrase these two because they kind of go together. But Matt, I want to start with you with this. How do you balance cultural differences with international sales offices with the challenge of like standardization for best practices? right? And there's a couple comments in here about, maybe Asia Pacific has some regional differences, or China is maybe a little bit different than that. And for folks, Matt has actually spent a significant amount of time in the Asia Pacific region. So he's going to have, I'm sure, some perspective on this. But Matt, like, how should we think about regional or localization challenges with some of these attempts to standardize?
So I'll give you some recent context. I recently ran a program for Salesforce, and we covered India, China, and Australia. And at the moment, I'm just wrapping up with a company doing China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia. And clearly there are cultural differences across those countries. And my first learning in this was back in around 2007, where a fellow who was ex-Oracle was teaching us his principles for management. And he, in one of his, I think it was principle 6, was something like, just remember, the French are the same as us, and they're not. They probably do better food and cheese. But what he was getting at was that if you think about your systems and processes internally, there's no excuse for cultural difference. I have always believed, and I continue to see success with requiring people to behave the same internally. I'll give you an example. Early on, I met when I was at Yammer in Japan. They said, well, we're not using the CRM because we don't do things like that here. We'll do spreadsheets or whatever else. Absolutely not. So with respect to internal processes, everybody must conform. In terms of how we communicate that, obviously there'll be cultural nuances and differences, and we should be careful about that. And as we're doing training programs, we have to be careful. If I ask a room full of folks in Tokyo, just like, so who would like to speak up about such and such? You'll get a very different response than I ask a group of people sitting in New York. So that's true. But where I think the nuances is an external sales enablement, sales methodology and process. It is absolutely correct that, for example, picking up the phone and cold dialing will have a very different result in North America than it does, say, in New Zealand. Right now in New Zealand, you can pick up the phone and most people will answer their phone. And in fact, most sales reps, no matter how junior, can get access to a CXO in that country. So the sales methodology that we apply here in North America will be very different. And that's where I think you need to be sensitive to it. And so break out systems and process internal from process and methodology external. And that's where the nuance is, in my experience.
I think also the point you had made earlier about first principles thinking helps translate those different external facing things and internal facing things appropriately. That's great. Adriana, I know you mentioned you're flying people in from all over to do some onboarding. How should folks think about this and beyond what Matt was saying?
I have to say that, yeah, Matt nailed the head, the nail on the head, because I remember doing these trainings and having people, especially from Latin America, where you do not, like, the sales process starts after you give pricing. Like, there's no conversation, there's no sales process, there's no discovery call until you give pricing. And it was very important to understand, to Matt's point, how all these things work, and to tell them, this is great. This is how you're going to take this and handle your process, but make sure that you bring it back to what the sales process is, and make sure that you get, as we would call the smarts to understand if this person is just asking for price for the sake of asking price. So one thing that in these global teams, and when you have, multiple offices, is, the idea of having either people in enablement that understand the culture and can help them as, helping the managers to understand that, or, yourself as enablement, using the manager as that person who's going to help you in how to translate those, selling processes that you have to abide to the culture and how people actually sell and buy in that region.
I think especially too for that, it's super important to get that mix right, which is great. We got a lot of great questions coming in. I do want to move on to our next topic to chat just a little bit, because I think this will get some folks' gears turning. We've talked a little bit how to do it in a theoretical. Let's talk about some people that are really kicking butt at doing it, and then we'll fold in some more questions. For our audience members, do use the Q&A panel. We're keeping track of all of those. But kind of going forward, what are some of the best examples or things that you've seen that are going on really well, or great things that you've seen from onboarding programs that maybe our audience members could take and run with today? And Matt, let's get started with you on this. I know you've seen some real interesting things.
Yeah, I think sort of at the highest level, I'll give you something very tactical and practical. If you're going to get somebody motivated to really engage with your onboarding program, we need to connect to their intrinsic drivers, right? And if we're thinking about revenue or customer-facing people, there'll be either two types of motivators. For new business hunters, it's going to be mastery, right? So the leveling up, getting better. The best salespeople want to see that through promotions, through money, and whatever else. So if you can create some sort of framework for them understanding where they sit and giving them something to aspire to. So, folks, professionals like Adriana have created, AE1, AE2, AE level sort of career development matrices. We should do something that's aligned to that in our onboarding and ramp program that says that, if you can achieve this level of certification or these level of outcomes, you're at level 1, then you can get to level 2. And it sort of accelerates them through the process in the program because they want to level up. That's the mastery. And then with respect to roles like customer success, they're more driven usually by relatedness, connection to people, right? So giving them an opportunity to connect not only with their customers and whatnot as early as possible and get those relationships built, but internally. And so onboarding programs that are not just done in isolation in a box, making sure that people have buddies and somewhere to go and stuff like that, particularly important for that. But then again, just to give you some fun ideas, even before we were all doing the work from home and remote onboarding, there are two ideas that I particularly like. One has been commercialized, and that is the idea of an escape room. And Coursera just did this recently for their sales kickoff, and it's perfect for an onboarding program as well. So that in your cohort of onboarding people, you've got to go and collect facts, solve problems, probably using your CRM is one way to do it, right? Or you can do it using some of the commercial tools that allow you to put your own data in there, which is a way to get them quickly through your content. So for example, answering questions about case studies that you've got in your content management system, so forth and so on, and solving those problems. Something I did years ago, I had a lot of fun with it and continue to do it, is not using anything external, but helping reps and CSMs understand their territory with a treasure hunt or a scavenger hunt. So for example, they need to write reports to discover how many types of these companies they have in their patch, or who's the person with this title at these companies, yada, yada, yada. You can imagine any number of permutations to help people learn their patch and then fill out what is actually sneakily getting them to fill out a territory plan. Because by the time they've completed all the answers to the scavenger hunt, they've got a territory plan. So those are a couple of ideas that come to mind.
The scavenger hunt idea is fantastic. It's something we've just hired some folks in MSP, and I can't thank Matt and Adriana enough for sharing that one, because it's easy to implement, and I think it's a very, very valuable thing. Now, Adriana, I love all the examples that Matt have, but what else, or what are some more maybe tactical things that folks can think about that define what a world-class onboarding plan or program looks like?
Yeah. So, taking back from the comments we were all making earlier and from Matt is saying, it's one thing that we call, and he calls it purpose and drivers. And it's also to understand, what are people whys? Like, why are you doing this role? Because not only the driver is going to be, I'm more like, I want mastery or I want this, that's good. But I like to go one step deeper in understanding what is that desire that they have for being in this role. And I've uncovered things in this trajectory that are super interesting. Like, why does somebody goes into sales? I want to go into sales because, I've had some younger kids say, I want to pay off my student debt, or I want to make a better living for my parents, or anything that is that. I find it's very important at the beginning to actually hold on to that and kind of use that kind of why that they have to help them in those moments that are difficult for them. Understanding that why for their buddy. I love the buddy system when you're onboarding. I think it's super good for them to have another voice, especially from a peer, to kind of like pair them up in terms of personality or interest, so they can actually kind of have that camaraderie and those conversations. But most important, when you build your structure of onboarding, is go as granular as week by week, understand what they're doing every week, and understand where are the points that you're going to do reviews. Do a lot of check-ins with people during those weeks. Do a lot of reflection. One thing that for me has been very important in onboarding is add a weekly reflection to their onboarding kind of like homework, and get them to like describe briefing them with like 3 or 4 questions about their experience and what they're looking forward for the next week. And most importantly, what do they feel that they need to continue learning on? And you're going to start seeing the gaps that they have. And also it gets this person, this new salesperson who is very, overwhelmed and learning new things and very scared, and they saw their quota. They really start to understand where is it that they have to focus on, because building the habit of doing deliberate practice when you are very young in the org or starting up in the org, those are the skills and the traits that are going to help you move forward, because you're going to learn, you're going to do, you're going to reflect on it, you're going to, change it and do it back over again. And you're going to measure yourself, but it's super important that you understand that there's things that you can continue to learn, but the things that you have to obtain in that first time to actually help you carry you forward in your sales career in the company.
And I think that's an important part for, especially Matt, what you were saying before about like the enablement teams of none. Understanding why somebody is in a quota carrying role is incredibly, incredibly powerful, because it makes tying this to some of the other concepts that our panelists have mentioned a little bit easier. If I understand that Matt's here to pay off his student loans, or to maybe get a down payment on a house, or whatever it might be, I now know a little bit more. He's not just here to crush his quota or whatever. He's here to actually really do something that's going to be world changing for him. And also, fun fact, that makes it easier for you to come up with contests to incentivize the right behavior out of Matt.
And also to measure them, right, Richard? Because
yeah.
if you're saying you have to hit this number, you have to kind of track what are the things that you need to hit to get to that number. And when the stuff gets very difficult and you're there and you're grinding and people don't pick up the phone or they hang up on you, you have to go back to something to say, that's my North Star. I will hit the 10 meetings and this is the way I'm going to do it.
This is why I'm in it. And I think the also the idea of the onboarding buddy is something that's incredibly important too. I know like you've both kind of hit on this, but it's actually very time efficient as a hiring manager and enablement person. A class of 2 or a class of 6 is largely the same. It's almost the same level of effort as a class of 1. So hiring in pairs or groups is oftentimes very, very helpful, and a characteristic that allows you as an enablement person, because there's always more stuff to do then you have time in the day. I know it's a little bit obvious, but hiring multiples is something as well that we've seen, and that conversation's come up in MSP quite a bit, that have folks be really, really really effective.
Yeah, Richard, can I add to that? If you're going to give somebody a buddy, you should have set firm expectations for the buddy about what that means. For example, you're going to meet every morning or twice a week or whatever it is. Otherwise, they get a very different experience, right, Adriana? You're nodding your head. You've seen this, right?
It's funny. I'm going to give an anecdote. I did this buddy system, and I said, okay, this is the buddy system. I did like a buddy system kind of meetup and gave them kind of like the rules. I told them you have to meet and have breakfast with them the first day. And then I said, open up like a Slack conversation and keep up with them. And to your point, kind of like diluted. There's like 2 people that kept up with their buddies, and then that was it. So then I said, okay, I'm going to create a buddy program, or I call it the mentorship program. And I started to give them, the mentors or the buddies, points and things that they're going to be able to access if they hit the milestones with their, new onboarded person. And magic, that was amazing. Like they had to submit a paragraph to us of, why do you want to be a buddy? What are you getting out of this? Are you ready to commit the time? We had like a form to like understand all the meetings. They had to ask for the reflections, and they had to give us why they believe their onboarded new person was not hitting their number, or they were hitting their number. Like we were keeping these people accountable.
That sounds like a phenomenal way too to give maybe a senior AE who's interested in more leadership or management, right? Every AE wants to be a sales manager. Cool. Here's your scorecard. Make your buddy great.
I even created a logo for the mentorship program, and when they kind of like succeeded, like your person graduated onboarding, they graduated as a mentor too. Like it was so much fun. It was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun. And at the end of the day, it helped with the onboarding people kind of achieve their results.
Well, it sounds like it comes back to what you were saying before and what you've both been mentioning throughout is like just being deliberate and planful about what you're asking your teams to do internally when onboarding, being deliberate and planful about when things are happening, and also what you're asking the onboarding folks to do. Back to Matt, Matt's point about the CPQ, probably not day one if you've got a 9-month sales cycle, like probably a little bit further down the road. This was actually a very popular registration question. I want to make sure we get to it while we still have time with both of you. How do you prioritize or balance some of the product and market centric aspects of onboarding with some of the sales process? And this is how we do things here, aspects of onboarding. And Matt, let's start with you on this. And then Adriana, I know we can probably have a full conversation about this one.
Yeah, I think, look, there are many different topics depending on context you want to teach them about. But I think for me, again, the first principle is going to be that product learning always falls to a second. And the reason I say that is because during onboarding, you've got a frontline manager who's going to be with you on, if not all, most of your calls and can fill in the gaps. And for some of you who are doing a technical product, you've got solutions engineers or sales engineers to fill in the product knowledge gaps. So that's the easiest thing to solve for. You can't solve for understanding customer pains, problems, sales methodology. That stuff you have to start getting into them early so that they get the repetitions going and improve over time. That's my perspective. What do you think, Adriana?
Yeah, I am totally in agreement with you. I think there's many things that you will learn. You can leave to learn when you're doing the job, and there's things that you definitely need to learn in the onboarding. But one of the ways that I tackled that was when I did this boot camp and I would bring people to do the boot camp, I would see the week where each day of the week was one stage of the sales process. So we would get people to do activities that were related most to the sales methodology, but there was one day that was to build the solution. And that day, what we did is that we brought solution consultants, majority of them, and other kind of product managers to do like roundtable sessions where these people had to take their use case. They had a use case to have to like present upon at the end of the week. And they would sit down with people from that solution and say, okay, I have 20, and it was time, 20 minutes with the people from X solution. This is my problem, help me solve it. And they will at least kind of understand not only how to start thinking about how to add a product or a solution to a deal, they would also know who were the people in the company they had to reach out to. Because one difficult thing about onboarding is when you open up that Outlook or Gmail or that distribution list and you're like, who do I go and ask this question to, right? So, trying to do that all at once and trying to give them as many tools as they could need by the moment they left.
And that's especially nerve-wracking too for the new hire to go to that. Oh, just put that in the sales engineering emergency help Slack channel, and the new hire is just like, what would you like from me here? Adriana, you started to hit on this a little bit, but there's a good adjacent question to what you were hitting on sort of comparing, previous week to this week. When you take a kind of a higher level perspective, how do you track onboarding and compare it to maybe previous employees that were onboarded in different cohorts or before there was an onboarding program?
That's such a great question, because I think that's something that you have to take into consideration every time you're going to do a new onboarding, is take your metrics, and you have to define what are the metrics of success for each one of your classes. Understand what were the items that you taught them and what were the activities that they did, and see, okay, when I replicate this, how should this class be better than this one if I'm actually giving them better tools, better training, better subject matter experts, I'm tweaking the timing, I'm lowering the quota. So to give you an example, I had one time a class of 19 people, and those 19 people didn't do very well. And we sat down and we understood, okay, why did this class didn't do very well? And the class before that one, that was where I onboarded, we did excellent. We took a look into the maturity of the people that we were hiring, their sales experience, what did they bring to the table, and how much were we overwhelming them with material during that time. And we also took a look of who was actually en route to hit target if we would have given them 2 more weeks. Like, we did a little bit of that study. And we understood that there was 2 things. The quota might have been too high. We needed to understand the level of expertise and skills and maturity of the people that we were hiring. And we needed to down the amount of learnings that these people did and the amount of time that we were onboarding them. So then when we moved to the next class, we fixed the curriculum and all the activities that they were doing. And then we measured these people against the last two classes and we saw the trends. And it's interesting because as you start to see when people start to hit their first, let's say, time to first meeting, time to first, whatever, you start to see trends in many things. And of course, being right now in a company where I have the ability of having a software that does that with me, I can actually put the programs and track people and understand that all in one screen. And I think that's where the importance of understanding what milestones you want them to hit is key.
I think that makes a ton of sense. This is kind of a catch-all question, and I want to make sure that we get to this before we start taking some more questions here. We're not going to go through each of these for folks in the audience. There's a ton of resources out there, but because we have two badasses on, what I was hoping for with this is they could just share some of the cool things that they've heard of to overcome Zoom fatigue, all of the madness that we've got going on in the world right now to make their onboarding really good. And Adriana, I know you've got some really cool examples for this, so let's start with you here. And I think Huddle was one that you were doing some interesting,
so Huddle
some cool stuff.
Yeah, Huddle was one of our customers, and they really cut the time of their programs, and they really kind of like understood how much time they needed to keep them engaged into Zoom meetings and how much time they needed to keep them doing things, outside of a Zoom meeting. I think it's super important, and I've seen this, and it's very interesting because now I understand how my learnings of COVID is actually kind of tie into enablement. When I see my daughter doing online learning, I see the teacher does like sprints of learning, right? She does maybe 40 minutes, 20, 15, and then she lets them with the pack that she leaves me to do her own work. One thing that I've seen with kids, and I also see with adults, especially in salespeople, is the attention span we all know is very limited. So if we actually make them, and instead of saying we're going to sit down in a Zoom for 90 minutes to learn about this, we actually say we're going to give you 10 or 15 minutes of a learning. You're going to do a breakout room and do something fun, with each other around this. And you're going to come and you're going to show your findings. And then we keep it in that way. The level of engagement is such that I was actually doing a training with my team late in December. So let's talk about the last week of December that nobody wants to be doing training, right? Nobody. And it kept them engaged in a 3-hour training, which was very interesting. And they're like, this was so good, let's do more. So it's very interesting to keep it that way. Matt, what have you seen with COVID and the Zoom and all this that we can keep them happy?
Honestly, this I'd never normally give an answer like this, but I'm going to point to some new technology. I remember years ago, I've worked in distributed offices and usually run field enterprise. And so having people come together has always interested me. So there's this latest round of tech that provides you with a virtual reality experience. And I think it's excellent. And I think it provides you a great alternative to pure Zoom. So for example, there's one I was made aware of the other day, spatial chat, I think it was called, something like that. But I'm not endorsing anybody. But if you go and have a look at these virtual reality experiences, you can customize it and then bring them into your training facility. But then to Adriana's point, when you send them off, you can send them into a cool breakout room that has a concert going on in the background through Spotify. Like this is an unexpected, exciting experience. And I think it creates a lot more engagement and there's a lot more flexibility these tools provide us than just pure Zoom. And I love Zoom, but let's break the pattern and surprise them with something like that. I think it's really important.
Both great points. And I think the breakout room especially, and like getting folks to work together on something is, even at MS, we've done a large amount of virtual events since the start of the pandemic. Certainly haven't done any in person, but getting folks together in a small room to talk about a problem area or brainstorm on how to overcome an objection or whatever it might be is great. With that, Adriana, I want to actually ask a follow-up question. Mm-hmm. How do you kind of check in on that or make sure like a bad habit isn't perpetuating in it, or you don't end up in a situation where there's not enough context in the breakout room and they do a bunch of work in the wrong direction?
You always have to have somebody that has some eyes and ears and some ability to facilitate. So I think a very good point is One thing to also think about when you're running these, especially in onboarding, is you're a facilitator in the room. You're not only a teacher. Like, I think there's some aspects you need to teach or to give them as learnings, but when you're doing these activities, you're facilitating them to do the learning. So what I do is I drop somebody who's more senior. Maybe it's a senior rep, maybe it's somebody from marketing, maybe it's somebody from sales, maybe it's a sales leader, and I kind of like stretch us out in the rooms. And I tell them, this is the guidance. So if you see the conversation going somewhere, just bring them back so they keep the focus. That's one of the things that I've used. And we have the typical, Richard, you're on mute.
Come back to us, Richard.
I made it. I did it. How lovely was my frozen face, y'all?
It was so good. It was like, oh, did he freeze or did we lost him? What happened here?
No, it's just it was just the information was so good, my brain just shut down on that. I appreciate that. What I heard of the answer was great, folks. We've got just a few minutes left, so we're going to kind of rapid fire some questions at Matt and Adriana. This was a live question coming in from Madeline. With language being as important as it is, and calling things what they are, looking at getting folks to kind of buy into enablements that are maybe inviting and clear. So as opposed to something like ongoing enablement or just-in-time training, are there terms that you're seeing out there in industry that are maybe more all-encompassing? And Matt, I know you had some ideas just in our panelist chat, but what are you seeing out there? And then Adriana will give you a chance here too.
Yeah, it actually comes to the highest level, and some people are, instead of, within the HR group, a lot of folks are talking about employee success, right? And I have seen, and I do like a descriptor, which is the employee success programs, right? And sort of as an umbrella way of describing what happens to you afterwards. It's about them, it's about their growth, about them succeeding while they're with the company. So that's just one that I've seen.
Adriana, any terminology that you've seen that's really like resonates there?
I would say that between like always boarding or, forever training, it's kind of like the two items that I look. But if we see it as, and I like what Matt used of employee success, if we're seeing that they're onboarding, then they're ramping and there's some sort of progression and career development, if you kind of create the milestones and those points, points that they have to hit, you can actually name them and name your program. I did something very creative once that it was like naming them like belts, like karate belts. And mastery was achieving, of course, the black belt. So what do you want to do to be a black belt, and where do you want to be? So it really depends on the flavors and the taste of each org.
I was so excited to hear that, Adriana, because I think I told you last time we met that I've literally deployed that exact system twice myself, and companies like Pendo and others are doing it now. I quite like that because it ties very well to the concept of mastery that drives new business hunters.
It does.
I love that idea. Time for probably two more questions here. And I'm going to take this question up a little bit higher, Connor. I appreciate you putting it in there. But the question from Connor is what can we look for as sales leaders or enablement leaders to make sure that there's understanding of information, especially for more junior hires? And how do we do that and set them up for success without being massively scripted? Adriana, let's start with you on this one.
That's a great question. So having come from an experience of both scripted and unscripted, the most important thing that you can do to see if they know something is do teach backs. Get them to teach you back the concept that you want them to learn. If it's a value proposition, if it's a financial terminology, if it's anything that has to do with your product, there's two ways, of course. If you're listening to their calls and you're kind of giving them coaching and kind of like, the heat of the calls of the day. The second one is tell them to come prepared. And that's another fun activity that you can do in terms of not only onboarding, but always boarding is do me a teach back of the methodology or the framework or the playbook, and you and other people listen and you see how they perceive the learning. And it's going to be a great opportunity for those guys.
I would add to that. I agree completely. I would add that also, of course, make sure that you have different types of case studies or examples they need to fulfill. And if they're not understanding it and they're being formulaic, of course, you'll see that, right? If you give them two completely different situations to handle. I do that in hiring, actually. So I get people to do real live examples in hiring to see if they're smart enough to understand the nuance between the two.
I think this is great. I feel like we could keep this conversation going for quite some time, but we are almost at time. Matt and Adriana, thank you so much. Before we leave for the day, what's one thing that you want our audience to go home with, to remember? We've covered a lot of ground here today. And Matt, let's start with you on that. Just one key takeaway for our audience.
This is a bit of a layout for level jump, but I'll say this. Look, you absolutely have to be data-driven, taken from scoring people in the interviews with actual, scores that are quantitative, and see how that translates to onboarding certification scoring and how that gets to ultimately ramp. And the one thing I would like all of you to do is, when you take Adriana's advice and look at what the actual ramp time was, whatnot, have the internal influence and horsepower to take it to your CRO and CFO and say, our ramp time is wrong. We've got it 3 months and the ramp time should be 5, and you can drive that with data.
Love it, Matt. I mean, I could have not said it better. Like, this is so good. Like, having data and knowing where you want to go and having the power of attribution of that program will give you that confidence to go to the CRO and say, I'm sorry, trying to achieve 15 meetings is not right. So let's take this number lower because this is the data that proves it, right? But I would like to add to that, one thing that I always talk about is always design your programs in analog first, and then bring them to the tools. But make sure that in design, you understand there's a difference between the learning, the activity, and the metric that you're trying to hit. Put those 3 things in 3 buckets and then develop from there.
I think that's the great, profound advice. Matt, Adriana, I know you're both incredibly busy. Thank you so much for taking some time today to share your perspective with the MSP community. Really great to have you both on. And then as well, Adriana, thanks to the team at Level Jump for the sponsorship of today's program. I hope everybody that attended here today, and for our panelists, everyone stays safe and has a wonderful rest of their day and a great start to their January. Take care, everybody. And thank you again, Matt and Adriana.
Thank you. Bye.